well, I'm Maria Takahashi. So let me just get this meeting started. So thank you for being here. One of the topics, okay, let me just start. We're doing this for Idea Skill. Who in this room heard of Idea Skill? All right, everyone, this is great. Okay, we're getting our job done. Yes, Sadie. All right, and who has engaged with Idea Scale, as in gone onto the platform and looked at ideas, submitted ideas, someone? Okay, nice. Okay, good. Now that we already have like experts in here, I'm expecting all of you to submit ideas, comment on ideas, all that after you get inspired from this meeting. Anyway, for those of you who may not know what's going on, I'm just going to give a very quick tutorial on this innovation initiative. So in case you haven't been there, just search innovation on Lorax, and then
Maria, would you share your screen so the rest of us can see?
Oh, I haven't shared my screen. I apologize. Thank you very much. So let me share my screen. All right, thank you for the feedback. And then I'm going to go back to my web browser. Under this innovation page, make sure you go here. And it'll ask for your login. I was not expecting that. All right, that's okay. I think I know. This is the battle we all face. I'm doing, what you're not supposed to do, which is like use the password that you can remember for everything. All right, so here we go. Here's the innovation platform, and you can submit your ideas, and there's only three required fields within this idea, where you say what your title is, describe your idea, does it require new technology, and then you will have to select between if your idea is generic. It doesn't discount from your idea. It's just if it doesn't fit in the sustainable diverse workforce theme or climate change theme, you put it into the open, and that's what your selection will be. Sorry about the clicker here. But I just wanted to emphasize that we do have two themes going on: the sustainable diverse workforce and climate change. And we asked a couple of people who are really into the adaptation and mitigation of climate change. Who can we ask to present on this front? And so that's how we have Brenda and Leah as speakers today. So after that, if you're completely inspired and want to propose a solution, please submit your new idea on this platform. So that's all I was going to share with you on this front. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me, Maria Takahashi, or the project lead, Sadie Wonder. So that's that. And that's enough of me talking. So I'm going to have our guests introduced by Lee Gansky from Mankato. So I'll have you have the mic, Lee.
Okay, good, thanks. Good morning, everyone. So our two presenters this morning, just mentioned Brenda Hoppe, a research scientist with the Minnesota Department of Health, and Leah Prussia, assistant professor at the College of St. Scholastica. Leah also operates a private practice called Natural Connections, which you may hear a little bit about this morning. So I heard Leah and Brenda, along with another expert in this area. Back in May, I heard them on the Minnesota Public Radio Climate Cast program. And the title of the segment was climate anxiety. And maybe I've been living under a rock, but I hadn't really heard that term before. And although as they talked about it, it made tremendous sense to me. So when it was announced not too long after that one of the focus areas of our innovation campaign was going to be climate change and climate adaptation, and we were looking for speakers who could help us, I thought that perhaps Brenda and Leah could help us come at this issue of climate change, climate adaptation from a little different angle than maybe we're used to, and as a result, spur some new and innovative ideas. So Brenda and Leah are going to present for about 35 minutes or so, and then we'll take the balance of the time until 11:30 for question and answers and discussion. We'll then take a break for a few minutes, and then if people want to continue the discussion, we'll do that until noon. So with that, turn it over to Leah.
All right, can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to start my little timer since we've been put on a strict timeline. Brenda and I had to thumb wrestle for about 18 minutes apiece. So here we go. My English name is Leah, and wow, what a pleasure to present in front of you today some of this important work. Before I get rolling and start showing slides, I want to do something experiential, which will be very interesting over the technology waves, okay? So since the only humans that I can actually see are in Lee Gansky's room, I'm going to call on you to respond to this brief exercise. So get ready, you three. So I want to invite everybody out there in cyberspace to think of a loved one, a positive connection you have. You know, maybe it's a parent, maybe it's a child, an aunt, an uncle, or a grandfather or grandma. I want you to bring them to mind. Someone that you love and you positively connect with. Oh, and my lights are dimming. That was on purpose, by the way. So Lee and company, as you think about your loved one, I'm curious, are you able to sense into your body at all? What happens when you think about a happy time or a good time, or just being with that person you care about?
Yeah, it made my mouth sort of curl up into a comfortable smile.
Nice.
Very warm and fuzzy. Yeah, I would same thing.
Wonderful. So now I'm going to give you a little bit of a trigger warning because we're going to transition just a little bit, okay? So now I want you to imagine that same loved one being systematically abused, raped, or tortured. And you're witnessing a daily shift in how they interact with the world, how they appear in the world. And I'm curious, if you were to witness that, day after day after day, and you slowly see this transition of this individual that you love, I'm curious, does anything shift in your bodies and how you're feeling right now?
Yeah, it's not good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I really wanted to lay this as an example, because really that's how many Indigenous people all over the world really relate with our earth, with Aki. And I think too often we've been really observing her, connecting with her as a commodity, especially here in the United States. So as you think about this trauma that you've witnessed with a loved one, if you've known this individual all their life, more than likely the impact is going to be a lot more sustaining. If you've known the individual for a relatively short time, it may not be as impactful. And I want to lay the stage for our Indigenous people here of Turtle Island and our Indigenous people all over the world that really have been experiencing watching trauma and watching the impact of their mother get raped and tortured. I think is really pretty aptly put. So solastalgia, I just wanted to plant that. So I want you to hold this idea of vicarious trauma. You as witnesses having this loving connection with an individual and seeing this happen. That's what's often referred to as vicarious trauma. I'm going to just quickly shift to my screen here. I want to apologize to all the natural scientists out there. I'm infiltrating as a social scientist, and I know it feels a little bit weird to get touchy-feely, but roll with it. All right, so do you see let's see here. Do you see my screen, Lee?
Yeah, we got it.
All right. So we're talking about solastalgia today, and towards the end of my 18 or 15 minutes, I'll spend a little bit of time delineating the difference between solastalgia, eco-grief, environmental anxiety. But solastalgia is an English term related to place-based distress from a lived experience of unwelcome environmental change to one's home. And Glenn Albright really had coined this term in his research. He's done a number of different journal articles related to this terminology. And as I mentioned, solastalgia isn't anything new. It's not anything new to Indigenous people. I can only speak those here on Turtle Island. It's been 500 plus years of watching this happen, of watching the shift in changing weather patterns, watching a change in our 13 moons that actually describe the time of year when we rice, when we gather berries, when the maple syrup starts flowing. We have seen that gradual shift over 500 years impact our relative, our mother. Solastalgia is also related to the inability to seek solace from a beloved place that is being desolated. A Hopi term, koyan eskatsi, means disintegration of human life when out of balance with the world. And a lot of Indigenous teachings, that medicine, that pan-Indian medicine wheel teaching is really about balance, mental, emotional, physical, spiritual, and that includes everything that lives. So the Hopi identify when we are out of balance with our larger life force, that is how they identify it. And then the Inuit, Ugianakuk, a friend acting strangely or unpredictably. So I know my settler relatives have started to see or experience this maybe in the last decade or two. Again, even though the Western terminology is fairly recent, these feelings and sensations have been again half a millennial for many Indigenous people. I'm going to dive into my clinical discussion. I really view solastalgia or what we're seeing impacting to our place-based, where we feel connected as trauma. And Stephen Porges talks about the polyvagal theory. So as humans, we've got 4 levels of the brain. We've got that reptilian brain that we share with those reptiles, and it's really about fight or flight. We've got that mammalian brain, which is more emotional, and it allows the mammals are busy connecting and having relationship with their offspring where the reptiles don't. They lay their eggs and head out. And then ultimately what makes us human, we've got that prefrontal cortex. So according to the polyvagal theory, as humans, when we start to sense something not quite right, we'll engage we'll do that social engagement thing. And what that'll look like for us, As researchers, as those in the field, it again is perhaps doing the research, having discussions like we are over web or podcasts, that we're really trying to figure out what's going on. We're being curious and wondering what's happening. But as the trauma starts to escalate, as we start to see things shift and change, many of us humans shift into that fight or flight stage. And we actually see that in a number of humans right now. Flight will look like anxiety, worry, or concern. The fight will look like rage or anger or irritation. And some of those action pieces that come out of it is some of the climate immigration that we're seeing. People are fleeing their homes because of the traumatic impacts of climate change on that place that they love. Others are fighting. We're seeing young ones, our young ones, young 16-year-olds fighting and standing for Mother Earth. You know, really stating it as it is. Our Earth is on fire. And we'll move into that fight stage, standing and doing the climate protesting, or maybe working on petitions to protect natural places and spaces. I know recently the White Earth Reservation created natural rights or human rights for wild rice. And again, it's sacred to us. Therefore, we really believe that protection of humanity. In the Duluth area, there's a handful of us working to gain human rights for the St. Louis River estuary for some of the same reasons. It's a part of the sacred migration that took place by the Ojibwe. So another example of fight. As trauma and arousal continues to increase, the individual will shift from sympathetic to parasympathetic, and that's the dorsal vagal, which will look like helplessness or depression, numbness. The individual will start to shut down. So when we're in sympathetic, it's fight or flight. When we shift into that parasympathetic, the individual is starting to shut down and or feeling hopeless or facing death. We often see the possum go into that dorsal vagal. It'll go into freeze and look as if it's dead. We see many animals in the wild do that. So I wanted to just share a little bit about this polyvagal theory as it applies to how we look at solastalgia. So when we're looking at a trauma response, what often happens if we don't move through that trauma response, an individual gets stuck in that sympathetic fight or flight, and again, will really be anxious, will be very agitated. You know, the heart will be pumping fast, eyes dilated, and like I said, moving in that fight or flight space. An individual that's stuck in the parasympathetic, that freeze state, again, it looks like they're shut off. It looks like depression. So symptoms really depend on the individual reaction to the vicarious trauma as they're looking or watching this perpetual violence happen in our world, to our world. How much time do I have, Lee?
You got a few minutes.
I got a few minutes. Okay. So differentiating between solastalgia, eco-grief, environmental anxiety. Again, solastalgia is place-based, but in reality, if you look up the definitions of ecological grief and environmental eco-anxiety, they refer to place-based. Our world is place-based. You know, many of us think of home as that only place or space, but when we step back and look at that larger context, the whole world is our place, is our home. And I really think we need to challenge the Western model of home just being the United States or home just being Canada. So solastalgia is that place-based response, the inability to seek solace in our home space. Ecological grief is mourning in response to loss in the natural world. either experienced or anticipated, which is really similar to that environmental and eco-anxiety piece. So I've seen the words used interchangeably in some of the pop media. They're used a little more specifically in peer-reviewed journal articles, but in my professional mind, it's pretty fluid. The use of terminology, especially depending on how you define place. For me, the whole world is home, and the whole world is my place. And seeing what happens in the Amazon absolutely devastates me and shifts me into fight. Next steps. I really want to just plant the seeds with you about the importance of relationship and reestablishing our relationship with the natural world. Those of us that are feeling this trauma feel connected. There are some that aren't feeling anything, and I really believe that their disconnection or dissociation from the problem is scarier than those feeling the vicarious trauma of solastalgia. My challenge really to the natural sciences is to really seek out further interdisciplinary research between the social scientists and yourselves. I really think if we remove those silos, that we're going to be able to address this concern that impacts the clientele, whether it's the natural world or the humans, that will be able to serve and address this much quicker, working together. The other piece I want to just put out there is the importance of working across indigenous and Western ways of knowing. I really believe that people indigenous to their home countries, their home continents, they have thousands of years of knowledge about that place and space. And Western science is so young. I really think it's time that we need to start listening to our indigenous elders to find answers, to move forward and to help shift this around. I'm going to hold. I think. Oh, I got 2 minutes left. But so those are a couple of challenges to the larger group. As far as when I'm working with individuals with solastalgia, eco grief, and environmental anxiety, it's really about assessment. I need to assess where they're at in that trauma response. Are they in fight, flight, or freeze? And once I determine that, it's actually working to help them move through that trauma response. So if they're in freeze, my goal is to actually help them engage with the world and move out of that freeze. And that's like a 3-year training process. So I'm not going to go into it here because I want to be mindful of time and be able to turn it over to my counterpart, Brenda, who's doing some absolutely amazing work with the Minnesota Department of Health. But I want to leave you with this quote. The paradox of trauma is that it has both the power to destroy and the power to transform and resurrect. It depends on how one approaches it. Trauma is a fact of life. It does not, however, have to be a life sentence. And truly, I think it's through relationship with each other, with the natural world, again, and listening to our indigenous elders, and also listening to the land where we'll get our answers. All right, me, Glitch, meet you. I'm going to just exit out and turn it over to Brenda.
Thank you, Leah. We'll look forward to, when we get into discussion, hearing from you a little more. Brenda?
I'm here, Lee.
Right.
Is this spot going to work for video and?
I believe so, can we?
Okay. Can everyone see the slides now? Can you hear me?
We got it here.
Perfect. I think we're ready to go.
Okay. Lee, you can hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
Okay, great. All right. Well, Good morning, everybody. I'm sorry for my little lofty perch here. I know you have one colleague that probably knows how I blew out my knee, because I've skateboarded with them before. But nevertheless, I made it this morning. So I am Brenda Hoppe, and I'm a senior scientist with the Minnesota Climate and Health Program at MDH. And I'm really grateful to join PCA's Innovation Week, especially along with my colleague Leah, to talk about a topic I've been spending a lot of time on lately, but it's still relatively new to me and might be relatively new to all of you too, this topic of climate change impacts on mental health. And the main title of my presentation is Solastalgia, How Climate Change Impacts Mental Health and the Value of Reconnecting People to Place. But there's actually a secondary title to my presentation that I don't often promote so widely, and that is this one. John Doe calls me a moron, lessons learned. So last month, as Lee mentioned, some colleagues and I, Leah included, were invited to speak on Climate Cast with Paul Huttner. It's a NPR public radio program about mental health impacts related to climate change. And the interview went really well. We got a lot of good feedback from friends and colleagues. But one of the few responses that any of us received from the general public was this email sent to me by a gentleman that I will let remain anonymous, and I'll just refer to as John Doe. And I know as a senior scientist and one that's been working in climate change for at least a decade now that I should by now have a pretty thick skin, but I'm going to admit that this email really bummed me out. It made me wonder just how many John Does are out there, how many people think, as he does, that there's really no basis for concern about climate change impacts on mental health. And are researchers like me just problematizing something that isn't a problem? So as Mr. Doe suggests, are my colleagues and I nuts for thinking that this deserves some attention? So for the rest of my brief presentation to you all today, I'd like to try and answer that question, to take some inspiration from this gentleman's feedback, and see if I can put together a brief but compelling case as to how climate change can impact mental health and why this is an area needing your innovative ideas and actions. So we'll just start with the basics. Minnesotans love the outdoors, and we love the weather, or at least we certainly love talking about the weather. We have a legacy as a hardy and proud four-season people. Our shared culture, including both indigenous and settler communities, is rooted in our connection to Minnesota's land and climate. We're a state of tribal fishers and wild rice harvesters, farmers and foresters, skiers, hikers, bikers, boaters, bird watchers, hunters, hockey players, and certainly cabin enthusiasts. Minnesota's core identity is shaped by our unique natural environment and our continental climate. And that connection in so many ways has been a vital strength for us. However, climate change is threatening to make that strength a vulnerability through the influence that it's having on historical weather patterns and established ecosystems in our state. So the PCA website does a really nice job outlining some of these climate concerns for Minnesota. Our temperatures are rising, particularly our winter lows. In fact, our winters are warming at a rate that is 13 times faster than our summers, and our climatologists say that this long-term decline in cold extremes is all but guaranteed to continue. Heavy rains are now more common and intense than at any time on record. Since 1866, the beginning of the data record, Minnesota has experienced approximately 19 mega rain events, and these are events with rainfall over 8 inches for just the one event. 10 of these, more than half, have occurred just since 2002. And these dramatic shifts in our weather and climate patterns are already having substantial effects on our built, cultivated, and natural environments. So for instance, warming waters are leading to a significant loss of walleye and trout habitat. The increase in extreme rain events is causing widespread erosion, contributing to landslides, overwhelming our existing drainage strategies, and threatening wild rice stands. Our ice fishing season is already shortened considerably, and the loss of ice has been accelerating. Conversely, our pollen season is lengthening. Our ragweed season is now 21 days longer than it was just in 1995 because our first fall frost is later. And of course, farming, already such a challenging profession, has gotten a lot more challenging as our weather patterns have changed so much and so quickly. And those are just a few from a long list of downstream impacts to our environment from the rise in Minnesota's temperature. The impacts that we've identified are really just the tip of the proverbial melting iceberg. And those impacts on our built, cultivated, and natural environments are already affecting our health and well-being. In my field of climate and health research, we've been working hard to unpack the spreading, pervasive influence of climate change on health. And in public health, we're pretty good at this type of unpacking, in large part because we passionately adhere to a holistic view of health, recognizing that there are numerous factors in a person's life that determines their physical health and well-being, and if these factors are impacted, health will be impacted as well. Unfortunately, the overwhelming focus has been on physical health. We've really only recently started to appreciate that the same holistic approach needs to be extended to our view of mental health and wellness. And that's especially true when it comes to unpacking all the ways that climate change in particular may negatively impact mental health. So this is what it looks like to begin that process of unpacking how climate change impacts mental health. This is an early diagram that was developed by Helen Beery and colleagues to capture and characterize the causal links between climate change and mental health. This framework highlights the climate change hazards that occur in context of local cultural, economic, social, and environmental factors that mediate or influence the links between climate change and mental health and need to be recognized and understood. And then furthermore, climate hazards may have an acute, subacute, or chronic influence over human populations. And this influence can be felt at the community level, for example, when local economies become less viable, forcing people to move for employment and weakening community cohesion with certain mental health consequences. At the physical health level, both directly as an exposure to wildfire smoke and indirectly as an exposure to Lyme disease, and these physical health effects can certainly have repercussions for mental health as well. And then finally, climate hazards can have a direct impact on mental health, ranging from the trauma of evacuation to something more insidious and less understood like solastalgia, which I'll talk a little bit more in a minute. So probably the most obvious, most studied association between mental health and climate change stems from the influence of climate change on the increasing frequency and severity of extreme weather events and associated natural disasters. Exposure to these events are considered an acute exposure to an acute event. And this acute pathway is growing as a pipeline for mental health impacts. Since 2000, the frequency of climate change-related weather disasters has increased by 46% globally. In the US, epic disasters like Hurricane Katrina and the California wildfires have led to a spike in research demonstrating that people aren't just physically and financially impacted by these events, they are profoundly impacted emotionally and mentally, resulting in immediate outcomes of anxiety or depression, as well as long-term lingering outcomes related to PTSD, drug abuse, domestic violence, and even suicide. An issue that's widely unappreciated here in the US is the role of climate-related disasters on population displacement, which can be incredibly traumatic and very damaging to mental and behavioral health. And this image was taken from a recent report by the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center. It shows the top 50 countries across the globe with the highest number of newly displaced individuals for 2017 alone. Of those nations where massive population shifts occurred due to natural disasters, the US was fourth, right after China, the Philippines, and Cuba. So this to me really underscores the fact that our wealth and development here in the United States won't shield us from the effects of climate-related disasters. And in fact, in that 1 year, 2017, well over 1.5 million Americans were displaced from their homes due to a natural disaster. But what about the other pathways, the subacute or the chronic pathways that Beery identifies? These pathways are less obvious, they're less attention-getting, They may lead to more generalized, more insidious outcomes on mental health. And these outcomes are being described by terms like eco-anxiety, ecological grief, and solastalgia. And some of these terms have been around for a while, but are just now being applied to the experience of climate change. And some of them are quite new, like solastalgia. But they all represent a growing effort to develop a language to capture how people are experiencing the less acute impacts of climate change on environments that we are intimately connected to and dependent on for income, recreation, peace, and solace. This term solastalgia was coined by an Australian philosopher and researcher, Dr. Glenn Albrecht, to capture these feelings of anxiety, despair, hopelessness, helplessness, a loss of comfort and solace that people experience in connection to witnessing permanent, adverse changes in an environment to which they have a deep personal connection. Albrecht first noted these feelings of solastalgia in farming communities that were impacted by a prolonged multi-year drought and indigenous communities that had experienced the destruction of ancestral homelands from open pit mining. And while there are a few but growing number of studies seeking to understand and characterize the experience of climate-related solastalgia, the pathway certainly makes sense. After all, there already is substantial evidence documenting the mental health benefits from connecting with our natural environment. Concepts like topophilia, forest bathing, place attachment, and ecotherapy have already taken hold, particularly with clinicians and therapists who understand the power of our natural environment to provide us relief from the chaos of our daily lives. So it follows that if the connection is disturbed and altered in a way that is permanent and out of our control, that healing power can turn into a source of loss and despair, alienation, and hopelessness. But passing the scientific sniff test is not enough. As my climate skeptic earlier kindly pointed out to me, that we need examples. We need stories and testimony from people who are experiencing climate changes and may or may not be impacted mentally or emotionally by this experience. In the decade or so that I've been involved in climate resiliency research, I have really come to appreciate deeply how important stories are for advancing our understanding of climate change and inspiring effective action. We have many stories on acute climate-related weather and disaster events and how people recover towards greater resiliency from these events. A Paradise Built in Hell by Rebecca Solnit and The Big Ones by Lucy Jones, who's somebody that I greatly admire, are really two excellent resources that I'd recommend. Yet we don't have many stories on chronic climate change exposure and its impact on mental and emotional well-being. However, that fortunately is changing as well. Both MDH and DNR have started collecting stories or testimonies from Minnesotans on how climate change is impacting them. And while not all of these have mental health as a focus, this effort of creating spaces to promote discussion of the personal ways that climate change is affecting our lives is very powerful, particularly from an agency perspective. If we want to get people engaged, and if we want to understand where and how people need our help. So if you think I'm teeing up a slide on the value of citizen science projects to combat climate anxiety and despair, you're totally spot on. But first, I just want to mention a study that Leah, myself, Christy Manning over at McAllister, and some other good folks are launching to capture testimony from a key group of allies in this match against climate impacts on mental health. And that's mental health professionals, therapists, psychologists, and counselors who are experts on creating spaces and providing language for talking about mental health, and are also in the best position to help people with climate change concerns work through these issues positively and proactively. We're developing a survey for licensed mental health practitioners to assess their knowledge, attitudes, and current practice regarding climate change impacts on mental health. Our aims are, one, to try and characterize how climate changes may or may not be impacting the mental and emotional well-being of Minnesotans based on input from professionals on the front lines of response. And then also to bolster potential opportunities for advancing mental and emotional resiliency in Minnesotans based on these results. Not only are we hoping to contribute to the growing number of studies that are elevating this topic of climate change and mental health, But with the results of this survey, we will be working with our MDH colleagues and our mental health promotion division to create support materials, perhaps a continuing education course for Minnesota mental health practitioners based on the needs and interests that they articulate to us. So the overarching goal for this research is really to discover effective means of interrupting this pathway between climate change and adverse mental health impacts, and to do it by ensuring that people stay connected to the places, the environments, the nature that sustains them physically, financially, culturally, and emotionally. We have all the evidence that we need to show how important maintaining these connections to place are for human beings. Estrangement from this place attachment, a gap that is then filled with anxiety, fear, and helplessness, will not lead to climate resiliency or positive mental outcomes. So I'm almost done here, but I've got to suggest one last reading assignment for you, and this time it's a recent paper by Dr. Katie Hayes from the University of Toronto. And Dr. Hayes wraps up an excellent review of the mental health implications from climate change by underscoring the crucial importance of getting people to active hope. Psychological resiliency, or adaptation as she calls it, requires active hope. And there's a pathway to getting there made up of 3 crucial steps. 1, an acknowledgement of climate change threats. 2, coping strategies for managing the mental and emotional burden. And then 3, engagement, leading to behavioral adjustments to reduce those threats. According to Hayes, quote, "The key point here is that hope alone cannot provide sufficient protection from the escalating risks of climate change. This active process occurs when the reality of the problem is acknowledged, intentions to address the problem are set, and engaged actions take place. While these 3 steps may oversimplify the complexity of acting in the face of bureaucracy, climate denialism, or downright avoidance and ignorance of the problem, these 3 steps are indeed the pivot points of transformation," end quote. So of course, getting people, especially entire communities, to active hope won't be easy, because I do think that there are a fair number of John and Jane Does out there that are still skeptical of climate change, and even more so for climate change's impact on mental health. But this is my final slide. Here's where I'm going to bring up citizen science projects, because I really think that they offer an effective solution, and clearly PCA is already a leader in this area. Citizen science projects enable the public to make a direct contribution to research. It engages them with others on an issue that's meaningful to them, and can relay a sense of empowerment that while the overall threat of climate change may seem unmanageable, every one of us can roll up our sleeves and get active, proactive, in learning what effects are happening in our personal nested environments, and advance our discussions on how to respond. Without a doubt, effective citizen science projects promote active hope. So if there's one take-home message I'd like to leave you all with today, having presented to you on this topic of climate impacts on mental health, it's this: citizen science projects hold great promise as an innovative, effective response to issues like climate anxiety and solastalgia. But whatever your ideas or inspirations are regarding climate change response and resiliency, we're here for you at MDH's Climate and Health Program. Feel free to reach out anytime for input or feedback that you might have, and if we can manage it with our tiny staff, maybe even some collaboration. So that's all I've got. I am really grateful that you all reached out and invited myself and Leah here today, and I'm happy to chat more.
I was curious how many people were in the room up there in St. Paul, but that was a pretty good round of applause there, so it sounds like there's a few. Thank you, Brenda. Leah, thank you again. So we've got, 15 minutes or so before our 11:30 break, and some people may need to leave at that time, I know, and I'm hoping some people will stay around. So I had I and the group, we had created some questions for Brenda and Leah, but rather than me asking those questions right off the get-go, I guess I'd just like to open it up for anyone in the room up there in St. Paul, or anyone on Skype to make a comment or ask a question, and maybe particularly people who need to depart at 11:30, maybe defer to those people first. So we'll just give it a moment of silence here, see if anyone has anything.
Yeah.
Has there been any work to see how maybe pre-existing conditions have been affected by the climate change? So, for example, anxiety, if that before and then feeling the effects of climate change, kind of how that changes?
Yeah, thank you. It's a good question. Should I repeat them, or does the mic pick them up pretty well?
You know, would you repeat, please?
Sure. So the question was, has there been any research that's been done on the connection between pre-existing disease like anxiety or depression and the connection with climate change? And I don't know off the top of my head. Leah, do you have any ideas on that?
I don't. I'm not familiar with it.
I think a lot of, I mean, I don't mean to toot our own horn, Leah and I, but I think the study that we're embarking on is kind of, you know, a little bit cutting edge and filling a necessary research gap. I do think the majority of the research that's been released on the connection between anxiety and depression outcomes and climate change has definitely been weighted more towards disaster events, PTSD type of stuff. And then maybe retroactively, you know, looking at how much of that existing burden of anxiety and depression may have been linked to a pre-existing, you know, disorder or ailment. But yeah, I don't know off the top of my head if that's been addressed. It's a good question. Yeah.
So how do you deal with the fact that the people who are already feeling most connected to the land and the environment and what's happening are the ones who care about the environment, maybe work in the environmental field or indigenous communities, and so you automatically have this built-in bias that the people who don't care about it believe this the least and are the most dismissive of it. And it feels like it's self-reinforcing then to create this bigger and bigger divide.
Right. So, I mean, are you kind of getting at maybe we're preaching to the choir already that people...
Well, no, but this comment that you got from how do you deal
Right.
with someone who they're not, obviously not connected to the environment and don't have it as a priority.
Right. Yeah. I know. And this whole, so, you know, how do you deal with somebody that isn't connected to the environment and how do you get them engaged on this issue? And what's really exciting to me about this whole area, I'm not a social scientist. I'm pretty like straightforward quantitative type scientist. And so this is all new to me being in the social science realm. But I have really, 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 as I said, come to appreciate the power of creating spaces for dialogue to get people to move from a place where they feel insulated, protected, you know, like, oh, this doesn't mean anything to me, this is maybe woo-woo stuff, you know, the tree hugger hippie kind of thing, and creating spaces where people can actually start venting on the issues and, you know, and the concepts that are most meaningful to them. So I would be delighted. I guess I come from a long line of farmers, and I'll tell you that farmers are some of our top environmentalists. But some farmers, you know, may are also a little hesitant about jumping on the climate change train. But I know that there are a lot of really exciting efforts going on, and I'll call out U of M Extension for this. They have developed a rural stress task force, and this is led by just an amazing gal, Emily Wilms, I think her last name is. And she's going out into farming communities and trying to create spaces for people to come together and talk about the burdens and stress of farming right now, certainly including the marketplace and tariffs and all that kind of thing, but absolutely including some of these major climate change related trends that we're seeing that are making farming so difficult and unpredictable. So if in those spaces nobody articulates the two words climate change together, I actually think that that's okay. That's a decent compromise for right now, as long as they're coming together and starting to share the story and share the frustration about, you know, why am I close to losing the farm when my father and my mother and my grandfather and grandmother were able to carry this farm through to generations, and here I can't keep it going. And just to get people starting to dialogue about those personal responses. I can't tell you how often I hear, like, you know, I'm afraid to go up to the cabin now because, you know, so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so have all contracted Lyme disease. Where did this thing come from? Or, you know, I'm nervous about the dog to go out on the pond because of harmful algal blooms and all these things. If we get people talking about, you know, what's happening in their own little nested environments, that is a huge push forward to getting them to acknowledge inevitably the massive elephant in the room, which is climate change. I guess that's kind of my long-winded response to that. Leah, do you have anything to add?
I think it's a great question. How do we heal that divide? And it's through relationship. It's through sitting with one another. It's through finding those commonalities and reminding. I think it's those of us that are still connected. I really think it's our role to be able to sit and listen and try to understand where the others are coming from. What, you know, as a clinician, I look at it through as a defense mechanism or dissociation. There's something going on. So how do we sit across the table and again come to some common language? Like Brenda said, climate change, I guess, is a loaded word for some of the humans on the planet. And, you know, maybe it's something else, but we've got to sit together to actually make any progress. So.
I am going to jump in with a question. Oh,
we had a question on the floor here, Lee.
Okay, I'm going to jump in with a question, sorry. So, because our time's winding down, so I'm going to go ahead and jump in on this question, because since this is Innovation Week, I want to at least make sure we get that. Well, it's more than a week. It's sort of a longer push than that for ideas on innovation. So I would like if you would both sort of comment on, you know, the link here between what you've talked about and innovative ideas. I know, you know, the first thing, as Brenda, as you were talking about citizen science, I'm thinking, okay, that's the direction I'm going to go. How can we broaden our citizen science programs to sort of more encompass climate change and adaptation? But what other ideas do you have about what you've spoken about and innovation?
Leah, do you want to?
Sure. A couple of ideas that I have, again, is how do we as natural and social scientists start collaborating with one another? You all speak the science of, you know, speak a different language than many of us in the social sciences. And I really believe that coming together and sharing the story in a couple of different ways is going to impact people differently. So I think we need to start researching together and start sitting together at a table to collaborate and be innovative with one another. The other piece is that I'm doing is I'm actually training. I'm training students to assess and intervene and start utilizing or acknowledging the climate, the natural world, as impactful to us as humans. And then I just want to just briefly share that a colleague of mine, Phil Defoe, we're going to be starting to hold Solastalgia space in the Duluth area starting the middle of October. So those of you in the Duluth area, keep your eyes open. But, you know, we're really interested in bringing, again, we may have some of those climate deniers in there. How do we hold space and sit with one another to share stories, but also, you know, shift to that place of action? So we're not operating out of that place of despair, but of hope and action to turn this around. Brenda?
No, I think that was great. Maybe we can fit in one more question here on the floor. Yeah.
Well, first of all, I was going to say thank you. This has been excellent. As you talk about the 3 steps of active hope, and of course the first is to acknowledge the climate change threats. The second part is where my question is, the coping strategies. And first among them is creating a space to share stories. I'm curious about what are a couple other examples of what coping strategies are, because I know that when I get down, I go to authors like John Muir, Terry Tempest Williams, Edward Abbey, or I go to the great photographers like Ansel Adams, and then also I take myself out to some of these areas to reconnect with nature. But what are some of the other coping strategies that you have found that have been helpful for active hope?
Yeah, that's great. Coping strategies, Leah. I'll just quick answer this and then pitch it to you, because this is a softball for you. But I would say, I mean, for me, I will say that working in climate change is very depressing. and I struggle at my job on a daily basis because it's like the pressure is tremendous and the knowledge is overwhelming. Any room I go into, as long as there aren't a bunch of climatologists, I probably know better than anybody there how bad it is. And that's difficult to run around with that weight and then with the responsibility of doing something about that in your daily job. But I get every day to go to work with people that are engaged, like brilliant people, engineers and hydrologists and social scientists and all these amazing people that are totally putting their best into it. And that's empowering and exciting and healing and enervating. So that's why I'm a big fan of the Citizen Science Project, because I think it transfers that same opportunity to the general public. And Leah, do you have some thoughts? Coping strategies?
I appreciated the question of the individual and the fact that you are, looking at art, going out into the natural world is absolutely a first step. I know when I'm working with individuals, it's about helping them remember. They may remember the connection, and I'm sorry, I want to get on my soapbox about forest bathing and whatnot. I think it needs to go deeper than just being there. It's truly about remembering our relationship with the natural world. And again, I would really like to challenge, it's all about relationship. And so my work is to help people come back to that relationship, whether it is spending time by the lake, but it really needs to be mindful. We need to start listening to the land, to the earth, to the trees, to the four-legged and swimmers, because, our prefrontal cortex has brought us to this place in space, and it's not a good place or space. So I really believe we need to go and sit with our elders and learn from them.
All right, let's get started
All the
again.
partnerships we're developing.
Thank you.
I gotta get you dialed in that.
Great.
Okay, yeah.
Workshop, and
Good.
if you're interested.
All right.
Yeah. Okay.
Lee, I hope we didn't lose everybody here.
There's a bunch.
There's, I don't know how many
there's
people we
still
have in the
at
room,
least
there's still a bunch of
18
people
Oh, is it really?
right here, so, and as I said, I want to open it up.
Brenda, I've got you on.
Yeah, Steve, yes, we have to, yes, definitely.
Anyone participating by Skype, now's your chance to unmute your mic, speak a question if you'd like, or if you type one out, we'll make sure it gets addressed that way. We'll just take a pause for a minute, see if anyone wants to.
I like what Steve put on there. It seems like he is listing ways in which you can engage. So I guess I'll check out Now You Know YouTube channel. Dietary changes, climate strike advocacy changes, advancing things like EV, of course, Steve, and renewable energy, etc. So that's great.
Yeah, thanks for that, Steve. I did see that. I was going to say something about that. It looks like we might have lost Leah. She's going to try to reconnect, but she said that if she is unable, I think she said it's been a pleasure, but Angela Primsberger was raising her hand. So Angela, go ahead.
Well, hi, Lee. Yeah, thank you, Brenda and Leah. Hope she can maybe get back on, but yeah, I really appreciate these presentations we've been having recently, and I work in human health. I got a chance to work with the climate and health team a number of years ago when you did the modules on climate and water impacts, and so I know you've been doing a lot of research for a while, including like local public health I mean, there's just so many good ideas and strength in numbers. So I just keep thinking about how can we build our momentum? There's strikes, of course, that are happening internationally, and youth movements and amazing things. So then I just keep feeling well, why it seems like in the regulatory world, though, is the climate deniers and the ignoring of science, seems to be taking the day? Or is that just what you think, we're hearing on the news, and behind the scenes there's so much that can be done? So I just thought, okay, if I'm a busy mom, where can I put my best efforts, to help on these frameworks, do you think, or help connecting people up in the Brainerd area, say, or something like that?
Yeah, this is Brenda. Thanks, Angela. That's awesome. That's a great comment and a great question. That engagement issue. And I will be honest that I am kind of your classic government scientist wonk, that I am not great about, and I'm really steeped in adaptation. So, my bias is not necessarily toward mitigation and helping reduce emissions. It's more like, holy cats, the horse is out of the gate. What do we do right now to make sure that we're getting the most health and safety out there for Minnesota populations? But so I do have some ideas with regard to how those of us across agencies kind of in our professional realm can start connecting and mobilizing. And you nailed something that, while the media is dominated by the fact that we have an American president that is very much a vocal climate denier, that behind the scenes, as you recognize, there's a ton of stuff going on. And I will tell you that, to kind of pivot back to a previous comment of mine about how energizing it is to work with people in this area, that there's really nothing that brings out the best in creative people than massive, huge problems. And this is probably one of the biggest, besides an asteroid hurtling at us from space, this is probably the biggest problem that humanity has faced. And so, I constantly mentor students, and I work with so many people. My job, as I've said before to folks, I get to be a jack of all trades and a master of none. I'm constantly doing interdisciplinary work, and that is so exciting and cool and innovative, and I can't recommend it enough. But specifics, there's ICAT, and Laura was in here. Laura Milberg has been such a leader in the ICAT, the Interagency Climate Action Adaptation Team. Yeah, so that's a really good cross-agency, forum that are bringing people together from different disciplines, from different agencies, and they're doing some really cool work. I'm not personally involved in ICAT. Something I'm personally involved in and wanted to talk about, but I don't have enough time today, is this climate data community of practice that our agency, MDH, has convened. We've had one meeting, and we have another one coming up that's scheduled for early November. So I just encourage everybody to check that out, to go on our climate health website at MDH. The idea with that climate data group is that early on in my career, I was forced by CDC, who is our funding agency, to work with climate projection data. And these are estimates of future climate phenomena that have been so widely disparaged and kicked around because they're modeled data and they're burdened with some uncertainty, but they are absolutely the most essential tools that we have in hand to address climate change in any sophisticated manner. I just think that every hydrologist on the planet, every architect, every designer, every epidemiologist who is working with any sort of environmental or climate weather metrics should be playing around with climate projection data. And there's such a tremendous learning curve that you can't fault anybody with not using these data, because right now there is such a huge chasm between those of us who are data end users getting the guidance that we need to use these data and getting the data themselves. We have Peter Snyder, who's a renowned climatologist at the University of Minnesota, who time and time again has put up an LCCMR bid to develop downscaled, super high quality, probably some of the nation's best projection data that a state would have in its coffers, and he gets shot down, it gets shot down. I mean, we've been working for 10 years since Ventura to get this climate projection data for use in Minnesota. The point of this community of practice is to bring together end users with climatologists and all of us to start talking about what kind of climate data is out there that we can use, how are different people using it in different domains, whether you're in commerce or MnDOT or anywhere else, and to just start creating a community of kind of that technical data users, because I really think that there is a tremendous amount of power in geeks. You get geeks data, and we can move mountains with that. We just need that essential tool. And there's nothing more compelling than numbers. There's nothing more compelling than numbers. If you go out into, I did the same thing myself, presenting information on future trends and data. So that's one specific thing I can throw out for you. I don't have really good answers for the mom and brainer because it's not my bailiwick. I would punt that to maybe Nissa Tupper with our climate health program, who's so good at doing a lot of that public interface. A lot of people, bless them, are on the front lines of doing more of that public engagement kind of stuff.
I see we were able to get Leah back, it looks like, so maybe Leah wants to comment on that. Angela, and she may have missed it, if you just want to restate real quickly what you were getting at for Leah's benefit. I mean, I could do it too, but go ahead.
Oh yeah, hi. I think Brenda said it really well. Even though that you may be watching the news, and of course there is severe problems happening from the president and others in leadership and government not taking action. On the flip side, there is a lot of amazing things going on. So just kind of like, how can I, in my work in the PCA as a toxicologist and as a mom and brainer, I guess, do my part. 'Cause, yeah, I want my daughters to have a brighter future and not full of clouds and rain and smoky air.
Leah, do you want to say anything on that?
I have faith. Just after seeing our youth over the last week and harnessing technology for good, I really do have faith for our next generation.
Yeah, I'll like Leah said, the youth climate strike was tremendously impactful for me in terms of innovative ideas. I think that's something that as agencies, I take very serious. I'm 46, I'm not going to be doing this forever, and I take very serious the responsibility of preparing tomorrow's climate workforce. And here in our agencies, I just really do feel like we carry a burden to mentor and do a lot of youth and student outreach. And I just think it would be fantastic to develop, whether it's through ICAD or some other, umbrella organization, to develop like a climate, youth climate workforce kind of thing where, youth can come in and work on climate related activities, maybe, in an agency that matches what their major is. And I'm really, really excited about that kind of youth engagement thing, because it's really taken me by surprise how much youth are engaged on climate change. And that is not an opportunity that we old timers can squander. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds like an innovation idea to me. A youth climate work. Maybe someone can carry that. It sounds like there's a question from up in the floor in St. Paul. But before we do that, so I think the Skypes work pretty well today. Although I'm getting this ominous message from Minute that says my computer's going to shut down in 5 minutes and 52 seconds because of a restart. So I may disappear from your view about 5 minutes to 12, and so if that happens, I'll just say my thank yous and goodbyes now. But it sounds like there was a question from the floor up there in St. Paul.
I'm trying to remember my question.
Yes, I relate to that.
Well, for those of you who may not know, I am the new ICAT person. I'm Sharon Stevens.
Oh, Sharon.
And I'll be meeting with Helen actually tomorrow. So Laura Milberg has been doing a super job doing 3 jobs, including MCAT and then ICAT, and then she's also been doing sustainability work. So, I mean, big shoes to follow. So I'm now doing ICAT, and what you had mentioned a couple things about doing some outreach for the youth that is actually on our list. We're hoping to pull together an ICAD work plan with our team agencies and also start working with quasi-governmental and nonprofit organizations. Most importantly, on the horizon is working with the tribes because they are way ahead of the game. The Fond du Lac Band particularly has had an adaptation plan out there for 2 or 3 years, and it's a damn good one. And as they have said, the representatives have said, they did a great, wonderful presentation on Solastalgia just a couple weeks ago. They have had some 100 years of experience in dealing with loss and learning how to adapt. So we have a lot to learn from them, and so we're hoping to engage the tribes on the horizon and learn from them. I think having this space to talk about innovative solutions, and that's why I was very curious about coping strategies, which includes creating a space to talk about this, and forest bathing is not to be underrated, and also seeking solace and inspiration from our great writers and photographers can go a long way to help us move forward to that 3rd stage of engagement. So I particularly am interested in the work you guys have been doing in having some spaces for people up north to talk about the impacts they see in climate change having on their way of life. And hearing that citizen engagement is very powerful because from that we get our stories. And from the stories we can better teach and inspire. Because as much as the science is important, and it is important, a bunch of numbers on a graph is not going to make the compelling case unless we also can embrace a story that brings those numbers to life.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yes. Absolutely. That's so great, Sharon, to meet you ahead of time.
Sharon, I really appreciate your words and the action that you're going to take in, working with Fond du Lac and the other tribes, but and also commenting on the importance of the stories. I think too often, if we only speak to the quantitative or the qualitative, again, we're missing half of the boat, half of the population. But if we can start implementing mixed methods approaches, like you mentioned, including the stories with the numbers, we can hopefully net and catch everybody.
Can I share something? So I work on the We Are Water Minnesota project, which is interagency with the humanities, and we capture stories and share stories and use stories as discussion prompts. And the structure is that it's always hosted in a community, so it's statewide, but the local host really digs in of a year of planning and thinking about building relationships in the community around water. And the events that the programming that gets, it's a traveling exhibit, so we do create an exhibit with local content. But the purpose, the deeper work is actually the host communities thinking about planning and bringing people together to talk about water that are like historical society and arts and science, and kind of bringing people together who maybe haven't partnered before. It's been totally awesome. And because it's about water, it's also often about climate, but not with the words climate change. So I'll just put that out as an example of something state government is doing that is attempting to learn about this work. And how can we include more? I'm thinking more about how we can include more in that is explicitly about climate, or learns from that project to try to do more conversation convening
Beautiful.
in that way, I don't know, about climate. Or just more in direct invitation to participation in different citizen science projects or different things out of that work. So, Leah, you're in Duluth.
Pardon me?
You're in Duluth, Leah?
Do I have to leave? No, not yet.
No, sorry. Are you in the
She's
city of Duluth?
Yeah.
Okay. That We Are Water Minnesota project came to Duluth this past spring. So I don't know if you got any word of it. Fond du Lac posted it, and it was displayed at the Duluth Aquarium. So it was really fun. Cool. So I'll just put that out there. I'm always like, how does my work, how could it be extended? So I would welcome any ideas that are popping to mind for people. Yeah, it's great.
I think you've got a great start. I'm not catching if that was a question or a statement, but it sounds like
it was just, I guess, classic human, like, I have a connection. I need to share it.
Yeah, we need to do more of that.
I hope this story kind of ties in a lot of things, but I was thinking about the anxiety piece and thinking about my own son, who is a 16-year-old and very conscious about many things, a vegetarian. He's very much an environmental activist, but I also have a brother-in-law who's a farmer, and my sister married him, and they're very much into agriculture in the outside the suburbs, and they are kind of in two different worlds, and I can talk to my brother-in-law about farming issues and environmental issues, and we don't always see eye to eye on other stuff, but I feel like my son, who is very much in this world of not seeing outside of this, activism and animal rights world, he sees him as the enemy, which I think is a challenge for a lot of folks, is it's polarizing. A lot of this language, I think, is kind of threatening to some people, one side or the other, when you start talking about this. So it's almost like I'm trying to myself mitigate the system of this world that we're kind of living in, that we're kind of creating, and it's not that easy to do, to get these two worlds, my 16-year-old son and my uncle, to talk about it, because they're not that far off. They both care about the environment. They just see it very differently. They both actually love animals, but they just see things very differently, but they see each other as the opposites.
Right. Yep. Yeah, mitigating that chasm between people who are on board and who are not on board yet. But, I think we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, and I'll admit to being a total wimp. I don't like fighting about it. I don't like doing public presentations where somebody out there is going to hassle me about the existence of climate change. To me, I just feel like, I'm going to leave that in the worthy hands of other people who have taken on that struggle. So I'm just going to lay it out there that I truly admire people that are doing that communication, come together, let's move forward kind of work. For me, I have found an easy out for myself, and we kind of touched on this, is just focusing on the threats and impacts. And when you do that kind of thing, it allows you to never even say the words climate change, to never even talk about, is it natural, is it human cause, all that kind of stuff. I can just get people together. We've just did a whole huge project with emergency management folks, and a lot of those folks are, the military folks, and they're very practical, and they're very critical and skeptical, and they're not known to be a lot of liberal, tree-hugging kind of folks in that sector, but they are so engaged on what I call climate change hazards and what they see as extreme events and natural disasters. And so we come together talking about the immediate, to use a term, the immediate fire that has to be put out. And then and then we come together. I've gone to all 6 of the emergency management regions, and I've talked to emergency management staff across the whole state. Rarely does anybody give me a hassle about the existence of climate change, and instead they sit there very politely and listen to my talk, and hopefully some of them are, super engaged. They're leading, they're leading the charge, and hopefully some of them will take the information products that we've developed for them, and they'll, slowly but surely things will trickle in from peers and other people And then, like I said, I think eventually it just gets to the elephant in the room, and we start saying, like, you know, oh my God, my spring planting is all screwed up again for the second year, third, or fourth year in a row. You know, at some point we're going to have to admit that there's a climate change crisis in front of us. So I don't know, that's not an easy, I mean, basically I just backed out of your question directly.
As an example of, like, on a personal level, I think this big picture is kind of as an example.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, I mean, go ahead, Leah.
Yeah, one of the things I'd like to add is just to encourage your son to approach with curiosity. I mean, even though the uncle is the adult in the situation, but when we approach each other with curiosity, it really does open doors versus going in with our set opinion to convince. I think that we're missing part of the story if we're not open to understanding what the other 50% feels or believes. When I approach trauma, rather than asking why, we always ask what happened. And for me, as I work to mediate and work with people across the aisle, it's operating from that. Okay, what happened? I want to understand where you're coming from, and again, to be curious. Come with an open mind. Again, I really believe that polarization in our country is not going to create movement. So some of us need to be the bigger humans and to be able to sit across the table and to operate out of that space of wonderment and curiosity, and where do we go from here?
I know, that's why it's awesome working with a therapist. Thanks, Leah. That's a good glass half full counterpoint to my running scared from these issues.
Thank you, and I think it's noon now, so I think we'll have to leave it at that. Thank you so much, Leah and Brenda, for coming and sharing what you've been working on and creating that space to have this conversation. And please continue this conversation outside and you know, in your own lives and on ideal scale, of course. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Yeah. I just want to briefly thank all of you working in the environmental services for all that you do. And I just want to encourage you to be gentle and care for yourselves, because you're seeing a lot of trauma with the rollbacks, with policy, and what's happening to the planet. So I encourage you to support one another and be gentle with yourselves. Miigwech for all you do.
Thank you, Leah. You're the best.
Thank you.
You're the best.